Welcome back to Jersey Matters. An op-ed recently appeared on NJ.com that raises real concerns about the future of journalism in New Jersey. Reporters have been on the front lines during the pandemic, delivering potentially life-saving information, and yet now it is their jobs that may not survive the pandemic. Here's the man who wrote the op-ed, John Schleuss, president of the NewsGuild. John, thank you so much for doing this. I read your op-ed in NJ.com on NJ.com, and I loved it. One of the things you pointed out is that local news has been dying across the country. In New Jersey, we're very aware of that because this has really been a news desert where we have to fight with New York and Philadelphia. And because of that, little papers, smaller TV stations get squeezed out. What's the reason for all of that?
So it's chain consolidation. A lot of these large companies that people maybe don't even associate with their hometown newspaper, places like Gannett, Tribune Publishing, McClatchy, they swoop in, they buy up these publications, they offload a lot of the work and try to centralize operations to cut costs and build these like kind of national networks. But that means that you lose a lot of journalists in these communities. And as people are switching to digital, that's having an effect too. But another part of it is the fact that private equity and hedge funds have really come in and seen newspapers as distressed assets that they can use to basically pilfer and take that money out of communities and put it in some other industry.
Yeah, it's true. You pointed out also in the op-ed, which I thought was fascinating, that although national news has been taking a hit in credibility, local news is still as popular and trusted as ever, and yet local news is dying. How do you square that?
Well, I think that people also have the unfortunate assumption that things are good in their local newspaper. But when you go to city council meetings, you find out that fewer and fewer reporters are actually there to cover them, which is dangerous to our local communities because these are the watchdogs for your community. Taxes go up, corruption goes up when you lose local reporters. So people really need them, especially in the middle of a pandemic when people are asking questions about like, what's the state of the hospital? What are the local rules? Are businesses going to open again, or are they already open?
Yeah, there's also life-saving information, as we found out in COVID-19. I would think that journalists should be labeled as essential employees because of what they've done, and yet I can't imagine that newspapers haven't suffered through the COVID-19.
Yeah, we've already seen a lot of layoffs and buyouts. I mean, one of the largest companies, the largest newspaper publisher in the country, Gannett, we represent about 1,600 workers, mostly journalists across that company at 38 different publications. The company said that they had to furlough people, basically asking them not to get paid and not work 1 week per month for 3 months. That meant like a 25% reduction in reporting capacity at communities across the country.
A 25% reduction in reporting capacity at a time when we need reporting capacity at its highest level. What can we do? How can, now that people know about the problem, how can they help?
Well, depending on whether it's broadcast or in print or online, if the group offers subscriptions or donations, subscribe today. That's like one of the best things you can do. Subscribe to your local paper, or subscribe to the paper that you used to read in your hometown. That'll help local journalists stay on the beat and keep working. But separately, we're also supporting an effort, Senate Bill 3718, where we're working with business groups and others. It's a bipartisan effort to basically get this paycheck protection relief inside the next coronavirus package. It would expand PPP to allow local newspapers, broadcasters, and TV to be able to apply for money that would be directed right to their local communities to keep people on the job in this middle of this crisis.
So what you're saying is that people in New Jersey should be contacting their local congressmen and Senators Booker and Menendez?
They should. They absolutely should pick up the phone today because they need to hear directly from you saying, I want to make sure that I've got local news, that, I can't get information about what's happening in my community from a national outlet, from a national newspaper. And the only way that I get that information is from local news. And it's 3718 is the bill.
And so give me an idea of, I mean, if somebody is interested, and I'm not saying people should do this, but if somebody's interested and wants to help save local news, what should they be writing on what would be effective?
Well, the most effective thing, I mean, the nice thing about this legislation, which is not true of a lot of things right now, is that this is bipartisan. Joni Ernst and John Bozeman actually supported this along with Amy Klobuchar and Maria Cantwell out of Washington State. And actually just yesterday, another Republican signed on, Moran from Kansas. So they need to say, you got to join your colleagues, that we need local news. A lot of these politicians depend on local news so that they know what the issues are for their local communities and their states.
Bring it home to New Jersey. So if this legislation doesn't pass, what do you see as the long range or even the short term effect on journalism in New Jersey?
Well, I mean, since 2004, New Jersey's lost 80 newspapers. This pandemic is speeding that up, and across the country, we've lost 50 newspapers already. So what's going to happen is in communities across the state, you're going to see corruption go up. You're going to see your taxes go up. That's what happens when we lose local news, and national news doesn't fill that void. So if we don't get this passed, if we don't get legislation to support local media in the next round of funding, that's going to be more expensive for all of the taxpayers out there in New Jersey.
Yeah, I know that you work with the NewsGuild, so you deal with newspapers all the time, but the same thing has happened in broadcasting too. WWOR left, South Jersey News closed up, NBC 40 sold out, FiOS News closed up. So this is an enormous problem in New Jersey. And I think you talked about taxes and you talked about corruption, extremely important, but the information that's provided also is life-saving. So it would be great if people got involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, the bread and butter of like what's happening in high school sports or what's happening in our communities, right? There's a lot of good stories that we hear from our local communities. So if we need a break from the national news and the drama that's going out in DC or in Washington, you turn to a local newspaper for what's happening at the county fair or what local recipes people are sharing.
Plus, you don't want Trenton to go unchecked,
No.
and that's a big deal because New York and Philadelphia rarely cover what goes on in Trenton unless it rises to Bridgegate or something.
Right. And a lot of those stories, they start out local and then they break it to the national level, but we have to have local stories and their local reporters in there to dig out that corruption and make sure that there's a watchdog for our communities.
Great point. Thank you so much. Good luck with the bill. Good luck with the Guild. And thank you for trying to keep news in New Jersey.
Thanks so much for having me, Ray.
That was John Schleuss, president of the NewsGuild. When we come back, fall sports are back. Our Phil Andrews visited with some teams who are already practicing. We'll have more from Phil when Jersey Matters continues.